The farmer's market was alive with energy on that warm Saturday afternoon. The air buzzed with the chatter of shoppers haggling over prices, children laughing as they chased each other between stalls, and the sweet aroma of fresh fruits mingling with the earthy scent of herbs. Among the crowd stood Marcus Johnson, a tall, well-dressed man in his early 30s. His neatly pressed shirt and polished shoes hinted at his professionalism, but there was also an aura of calm confidence about him. He moved leisurely from stall to stall, inspecting ripe tomatoes, fragrant spices, and crisp greens, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with vendors. As he paused by a fruit stand to examine a basket of apples, Marcus pulled out his phone to check a message. Without thinking much of it, he began speaking softly into the device in fluent French, discussing weekend plans with a friend. His voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear snippets of the conversation. Most people paid no attention. After all, hearing different languages in such a diverse setting wasn't unusual. But one woman did take notice. Her name was Patricia, a middle-aged woman with tightly curled blonde hair and a stern expression etched onto her face. She had been shopping a few feet away when Marcus's words reached her ears. Patricia's lips pursed as she watched him. To her, his presence, and especially his use of another language, felt like an intrusion. Her mind raced with preconceived notions, fueled by years of ingrained biases she never questioned. Clutching her reusable bag tighter, she marched toward him with determination. When she reached Marcus, she stopped abruptly, planting herself directly in his path. For a moment, there was silence as their eyes met. Marcus raised an eyebrow, sensing something was amiss but unsure what to expect. Then came the words that would turn this ordinary day into an unforgettable scene. "You don't belong here," Patricia spat, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Go back to Africa." The words hit like a punch, cutting through the cheerful hum of the marketplace. Everyone within earshot froze. Vendors paused mid-transaction. Customers stopped browsing, and even the children seemed to sense the sudden tension. All eyes turned to Marcus, waiting to see how he would react. Would he lash out, walk away, or respond in some way no one could predict? For a brief moment, Marcus felt anger simmer beneath the surface. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like this to him. It likely wouldn't be the last. Yet, standing there surrounded by strangers, he realized this was more than just a personal attack. This was a chance to make a statement, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel unwelcome because of the color of their skin. Taking a deep breath, Marcus steadied himself. Instead of letting rage take over, he chose to remain composed. Little did Patricia know, her comment had unknowingly set the stage for a response that would leave the entire crowd speechless, and perhaps change her perspective forever. The moment Patricia's words hung in the air, time seemed to slow down. Marcus felt the weight of her statement pressing against him, but he refused to let it crush him. Around them, the once lively farmers' market had fallen eerily silent. The cheerful chatter and laughter that had filled the space just moments ago were replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Shoppers froze mid-step, vendors stopped arranging their goods, and even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into the background. All eyes were now fixed on Marcus and Patricia, creating a spotlight neither of them had anticipated. Patricia stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her stance rigid and defiant. Her lips curled into a smug expression, as if she believed her words had already won the argument before it even began. She glanced around at the crowd, perhaps expecting nods of agreement or murmurs of support. But instead, she found only uneasy stares and furrowed brows. Some people shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact altogether, while others exchanged glances, silently questioning whether they should intervene. A young mother holding her child's hand looked visibly upset, shaking her head slightly as if to say, "This isn't right." Marcus, for his part, remained eerily calm. He didn't flinch or raise his voice. Instead, he took a deliberate step back, setting down the bag of apples he'd been holding onto the nearest table. His movements were slow and measured, almost as if he were giving himself time to process what had just happened, and to decide how best to respond. For a fleeting second, it seemed like he might simply walk away, leaving Patricia's comment unanswered. After all, why waste energy engaging with someone so clearly unwilling to listen? But then something inside him stirred, a quiet determination to turn this ugly moment into an opportunity for understanding. As Marcus turned to face Patricia fully, the tension in the air grew thicker. The crowd, now larger than before, leaned in ever so slightly, eager to see what would happen next. A teenage boy filming the scene on his phone whispered to his friend, "This is wild." An elderly man nearby muttered under his breath, "She's got no business saying that." Despite the murmurs rippling through the gathering, no one dared to speak up directly. Not yet. They waited, holding their breath, wondering if Marcus would retaliate or retreat. What struck everyone most was Marcus's demeanor. There was no trace of anger in his expression, no clenched fists or fiery glares. Instead, he wore a look of quiet resolve, as though he had already decided on the perfect way to handle the situation. His calmness was magnetic. It drew people in, making them want to hear what he had to say. Even Patricia seemed momentarily thrown off balance. Perhaps she had expected outrage, shouting, or tears, anything but the composed figure standing before her now. For the first time since approaching him, she appeared unsure of herself, though she tried hard to mask it with her usual bravado. And then, without saying a word, Marcus did something unexpected. He smiled faintly. It wasn't a smirk of mockery or condescension, but rather a knowing smile, one that hinted at confidence and wisdom. That small gesture sent a ripple through the crowd. People exchanged curious looks, sensing that whatever came next would be worth hearing. Patricia, however, bristled, mistaking his smile for arrogance. "What are you grinning about?" she snapped, her voice louder this time, tinged with frustration. But Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another deep breath, letting the silence stretch just a little longer. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You know," he began, his tone calm but firm, "I think we need to talk about where I'm really from. And maybe where you come from too." The words landed like a challenge, sparking whispers among the onlookers. No one could have predicted where this conversation was headed, but one thing was certain. Marcus wasn't backing down. And judging by the growing unease in Patricia's posture, she hadn't expected him to take control of the narrative so effortlessly. Marcus's calm response caught everyone off guard, including Patricia. Her earlier confidence wavered as she realized this wasn't going to be the one-sided confrontation she had envisioned. Instead of reacting with anger or walking away, Marcus stood tall, his voice steady and measured. "You know," he began again, leaning slightly forward as if sharing a secret, "I think you might be confused about something." His tone was conversational, almost friendly, which only added to the tension in the air. The crowd leaned in closer, hanging onto every word. Patricia frowned, clearly taken aback by his composure. "Confused? About what?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave higher than before. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, betraying her growing discomfort. Marcus, however, remained unshaken. With a small, polite smile, he asked, "Have you ever been to Africa?" The question hung there for a moment, simple yet loaded with meaning. Patricia blinked rapidly, caught off guard. For a split second, she looked like she didn't know how to respond. Finally, she stammered, "No. Why would I? It's not my problem." Her answer drew a few gasps from the audience. Some people exchanged glances, shaking their heads subtly at her dismissive tone. But Marcus didn't react with frustration or sarcasm. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less. "That's okay," he said gently, his voice carrying just enough warmth to keep the conversation civil. "But let me tell you something interesting. Africa is where humanity began. Every single person on this planet, every race, every culture, can trace their roots back to Africa. So technically," he paused for effect, his eyes meeting hers directly. "We're all from there." The impact of his words rippled through the crowd like a wave. A young woman standing nearby whispered to her companion, "Wow, that's deep." An older man in a baseball cap nodded approvingly, muttering, "He's got a point." Even Patricia seemed momentarily stunned into silence, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for a rebuttal, but finding none. Marcus seized the opportunity to continue, his voice growing firmer with each sentence. "Now, I'm not saying this to make you feel bad," he explained, holding up a hand to soften his approach. "I'm just pointing out that when someone tells me to go back somewhere, it doesn't really make sense. Because guess what? My family has been part of this country for generations. We've contributed to its growth, its progress, its history. And yet, people like you still insist on telling me where I do or don't belong." He paused again, letting his words sink in. Around him, the crowd stirred, some nodding in agreement while others murmured encouragement. Patricia's face flushed red, though whether from embarrassment or irritation was unclear. She crossed her arms tighter over her chest, as if trying to shield herself from the weight of his argument. "That's nonsense," she snapped, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You're twisting things around to suit your agenda." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her with a mix of curiosity and pity. "Am I?" he countered softly. "Or am I simply stating facts? Facts that challenge the assumptions you've held onto for so long." By now, the crowd had grown even larger, spilling out beyond the immediate vicinity of the fruit stand. People were recording the exchange on their phones, whispering to each other, and clapping quietly whenever Marcus made a particularly compelling point. One vendor, a middle-aged woman selling handmade candles, stepped forward slightly, calling out, "He's right, you know. This kind of talk doesn't solve anything. It divides us." Her comment earned murmurs of approval from those around her, further isolating Patricia. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus never raised his voice or resorted to personal attacks. Instead, he maintained his calm demeanor, speaking with the authority of someone who knew his worth and refused to let ignorance diminish it. As he spoke, it became clear that this wasn't just about defending himself. It was about educating everyone present, including Patricia. Whether she chose to listen or not was up to her, but Marcus was determined to plant seeds of understanding in the minds of those watching. And judging by the reactions of the crowd, those seeds were already beginning to take root. Patricia's frustration was palpable as she struggled to regain control of the conversation. Her earlier confidence had crumbled under Marcus's calm and logical responses, leaving her flustered and defensive. "That's nonsense," she exclaimed again, her voice louder this time, tinged with desperation. She glanced around at the crowd, searching for support, but found only disapproving stares and whispered critiques. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others crossed their arms, silently challenging her to justify her stance. The more she spoke, the more isolated she became. Marcus, however, remained composed, his expression thoughtful rather than confrontational. He leaned slightly forward, his posture open and inviting, as if he were speaking not just to Patricia but to everyone gathered around them. "Let me ask you something," he said, his tone gentle yet firm. "Have you ever stopped to think about where your ancestors came from?" Patricia blinked, caught off guard by the question. Before she could respond, Marcus continued, "Most of us are descendants of immigrants, people who left their homelands in search of better lives. Did your family always live here, or did they come from somewhere else?" The question struck a nerve. Patricia hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, she looked genuinely unsure of how to answer. Sensing her discomfort, Marcus pressed on, his voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention. "If we're going to talk about belonging, then let's be honest. This land wasn't yours to begin with. It belonged to indigenous peoples long before anyone else arrived. And since then, countless cultures and communities have contributed to making this country what it is today. So when you tell someone like me to go back, you're ignoring history." You're erasing the sacrifices and struggles of so many who built this nation." His words resonated deeply with the crowd. A man holding a reusable grocery bag nodded emphatically, saying aloud, "He's right. My grandparents came here from Italy with nothing, worked hard, and helped build this place. Telling someone to leave because of their skin color is just wrong." Others chimed in, sharing snippets of their own family histories, stories of immigration, resilience, and contribution. One woman recounted how her Irish ancestors faced discrimination when they first arrived, drawing parallels between their experiences and the racism Marcus endured. Each story added weight to Marcus's argument, turning the moment into a collective reflection on identity and belonging. Patricia, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated. Her attempts to interrupt or deflect fell flat as the crowd's focus remained firmly on Marcus. When she tried to argue that her comments weren't about history, but about keeping traditions, Marcus raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Traditions evolve," he countered smoothly. "They grow and adapt as new voices join the conversation. That's what makes a culture rich and dynamic. Clinging to outdated ideas doesn't preserve tradition. It stifles progress." The audience erupted into murmurs of agreement, some even applauding softly. Patricia's face flushed red, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her bag. She opened her mouth to retort, but the words died on her lips. It was clear she hadn't anticipated such a robust defense, or the overwhelming support Marcus was receiving from strangers. As the reality of the situation sank in, her bravado began to crack. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself, glancing nervously at the crowd before quickly averting her gaze. Seizing the momentum, Marcus turned his attention fully to the bystanders, addressing them directly. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. "It's about all of us recognizing our shared humanity. When we divide ourselves based on race or background, we lose sight of what truly matters, building a community where everyone feels valued and respected." His words struck a chord, earning nods of approval and murmurs of encouragement. Even those who had initially stood silently now felt compelled to engage, asking questions or offering their perspectives. As the discussion unfolded, it became evident that Marcus wasn't interested in winning an argument. He wanted to spark change. By flipping the narrative and focusing on education rather than confrontation, he transformed a hostile encounter into a teachable moment. Patricia, overwhelmed and outnumbered, retreated further into herself, her earlier hostility replaced by uncertainty. The crowd, on the other hand, was energized, inspired by Marcus's ability to rise above hatred with grace and wisdom. What started as a tense standoff had evolved into something far greater, a powerful reminder of the strength found in unity and understanding. As the conversation shifted from a direct exchange with Patricia to an open dialogue with the crowd, Marcus seized the opportunity to deepen the impact of his message. He stepped back slightly, creating a sense of space that invited others to join in rather than feel like they were witnessing a private argument. With a warm smile, he addressed the growing audience, his voice carrying just enough emotion to connect with each listener personally. "Let's talk about what this country really is," he began, his tone conversational but deliberate. "It's not perfect. It never has been. But it's built on diversity. Every culture, every race, every story has played a role in shaping what America is today." The crowd leaned in, captivated by his words. A young couple holding hands nodded in agreement, while an older man adjusted his glasses as if preparing to hear something profound. Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the faces around him. "Think about your own families for a moment," he urged. "How many of you have ancestors who came here seeking freedom, opportunity, or safety? How many of you know what it means to work hard and build a life in a place that wasn't always welcoming?" His questions resonated deeply, prompting murmurs of acknowledgement from the audience. Taking a breath, Marcus shared a personal story that brought his point home. "My grandfather served in World War I," he said, his voice softening with emotion. "He fought for a country that often refused to see him as equal. He faced discrimination at home after risking his life abroad. But still, he loved this nation. Why? Because he believed in its potential. He believed in the promise of equality and justice for all, even if it hadn't been realized yet. The crowd grew quieter, hanging on to every word. Some people exchanged glances, visibly moved by the sincerity in his voice. He taught me that progress isn't given, it's earned, Marcus added, his gaze steady. And when someone tells me I don't belong here, it doesn't just hurt me. It dishonors everything my grandfather stood for, everything so many people have sacrificed for. His final sentence lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. A woman standing near the front wiped away a tear, whispering to her friend, "That's so powerful." Even those who had initially remained silent now seemed fully engaged, nodding along or offering quiet words of support. Patricia, meanwhile, stood awkwardly to the side, her earlier defiance replaced by visible unease. She fidgeted with the strap of her bag, avoiding eye contact with both Marcus and the crowd. For the first time, she appeared unsure of how to respond, or whether responding was even possible. The weight of Marcus's words had shifted the dynamics entirely, turning the confrontation into a moment of collective reflection. Instead of defending herself, she found herself isolated, her views challenged not only by Marcus, but also by the diverse group of strangers surrounding her. Sensing the shift, Marcus turned back to the audience, his expression earnest. "This isn't just about one person being rude or hateful," he explained. "It's about recognizing the harm caused by these kinds of attitudes and choosing to do better. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And that starts with understanding and respecting each other's stories." His message struck a chord, earning applause from several onlookers. One teenager filming the scene on his phone whispered excitedly, "This is amazing. People need to hear this." Even Patricia couldn't ignore the transformation happening around her. As Marcus spoke, she glanced nervously at the crowd, perhaps realizing for the first time how out of step her views were with the majority. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of accountability. Though she didn't speak, her body language conveyed a mix of discomfort and regret, a stark contrast to the confident figure who had approached Marcus just minutes earlier. By focusing on education and empathy, Marcus had turned a tense encounter into a lesson in humanity. The crowd, now fully invested in the moment, began sharing their own thoughts. One man recounted how his Japanese-American family had been interned during World War II, highlighting the dangers of prejudice. Another woman spoke about her Muslim neighbors facing discrimination after 9/11, emphasizing the importance of solidarity. Each story added depth to the conversation, reinforcing Marcus's central message, that division weakens us, while unity strengthens us. As the discussion unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about calling out racism. It was about fostering understanding and inspiring action. Marcus had ignited something powerful, a shared commitment to building a more inclusive community. And though Patricia remained silent, the ripple effects of his words would stay with her, and everyone else, long after the farmer's march. As the crowd continued to share their stories and reflections, Marcus took a moment to let the weight of the conversation settle. The energy around him was electric, charged with emotion, understanding, and a shared desire for change. People were no longer passive observers. They had become active participants in a dialogue that transcended the initial confrontation. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He knew this moment was an opportunity to leave a lasting impression, not just on Patricia, but on everyone present. Turning back to face Patricia directly, Marcus softened his tone, his voice tinged with compassion rather than judgment. "I could choose to hate you for what you said today," he admitted, his words cutting through the hum of the crowd. There was a collective intake of breath as all eyes shifted between Marcus and Patricia. She looked up sharply, clearly startled by his admission. Her arms, still crossed tightly over her chest, seemed to tighten even further as if bracing herself for a verbal attack. But Marcus didn't deliver one. Instead, he shook his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. "But I won't," he continued, "because hatred doesn't solve anything. It only harms the person carrying it." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding emphatically while others exchanged glances, moved by his restraint. Patricia, however, appeared conflicted. For the first time since the encounter began, she dropped her defensive posture, her shoulders sagging slightly. Though she didn't speak, her body language suggested she was grappling with something, a mix of guilt, shame, and perhaps even a flicker of self-awareness. Marcus noticed the subtle shift and pressed gently, not to punish her but to encourage reflection. "Hatred is easy," he explained, his voice calm and measured. "It's easy to point fingers, to blame others, to build walls instead of bridges. But it takes courage to look inward, to question your beliefs and admit when you're wrong." As he spoke, he scanned the faces of the crowd, making eye contact with as many people as possible. And courage isn't about never feeling afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard. His words resonated deeply, earning soft applause from several onlookers. One woman whispered to her companion, "He's incredible. How does he stay so calm?" Patricia's discomfort grew palpable. She glanced at the ground, unable to meet Marcus's gaze or the eyes of the crowd. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a quiet vulnerability that surprised even those who had been rooting against her. Sensing her unease, Marcus offered a lifeline, not out of obligation, but out of genuine concern. "We all make mistakes," he said softly. "What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them. Will we double down on our ignorance, or will we take a step toward growth?" His question hung in the air, unanswered but impossible to ignore. Patricia opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find the right words. The crowd, too, fell silent, giving her space to process. Though no one expected a sudden transformation, there was a sense that the seeds of change had been planted. Even Patricia's rigid stance had softened slightly, her clenched fists relaxing at her sides. Seizing the moment, Marcus turned his focus back to the audience, reinforcing the broader lesson. "This isn't about shaming anyone," he emphasized, his voice warm and inclusive. "It's about learning from each other, about recognizing that we all have biases, and that it's okay to confront them. What's not okay is letting those biases divide us." His message struck a chord, prompting nods of agreement and murmurs of encouragement. A young man in a hoodie stepped forward, raising his hand timidly. When Marcus acknowledged him, the young man spoke up. "I used to think like her," he admitted, gesturing toward Patricia. "But hearing you talk, it makes me realize how much I still need to learn." Marcus smiled warmly, grateful for the honesty. "That's the first step," he replied. "Acknowledging where we are so we can figure out where we want to go." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the marketplace with a sense of hope and unity. Patricia, now visibly shaken, took a hesitant step backward, as if preparing to leave. But before she could retreat entirely, Marcus extended a small gesture of goodwill. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice sincere, "for giving me the chance to have this conversation, not just with you, but with everyone here." Though Patricia didn't respond verbally, her expression betrayed a flicker of remorse. Whether she would act on it remained uncertain, but the impact of the moment was undeniable. By choosing empathy over anger, Marcus had transformed a hostile encounter into a powerful lesson in humanity, one that left an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. The atmosphere in the farmers' market had shifted entirely. What began as a tense and confrontational moment between Marcus and Patricia had evolved into something far greater, a powerful exchange of ideas, emotions, and reflections that resonated deeply with everyone present. The crowd was now fully engaged, their energy electric with a mix of admiration for Marcus's composure and discomfort over Patricia's earlier remarks. As Marcus wrapped up his heartfelt appeal to Patricia about courage and growth, there was an undeniable sense that the climax of this encounter was approaching. Patricia stood frozen, her defenses crumbling under the weight of Marcus's words and the collective disapproval of the crowd. She glanced around nervously, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for any sign of support, but found none. Instead, she saw only judgment, curiosity, or outright disappointment. Some people shook their heads slowly, while others simply stared at her, waiting to see what she would do next. For someone who prided herself on being outspoken, Patricia suddenly seemed lost for words. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost childlike vulnerability. Marcus, sensing the gravity of the moment, decided to deliver one final thought. One designed not just to address Patricia, but to leave a lasting impression on everyone watching. "You know," he began, his voice steady yet filled with conviction, "when I was younger, I used to let comments like yours get to me. They made me feel small, like I didn't belong. But over time, I realized something important. The problem isn't me. It's the mindset that tells us some people are worth less because of where they come from or how they look." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "That kind of thinking doesn't just hurt individuals, it weakens our entire society. It divides us when we should be coming together." His statement drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd. A middle-aged woman holding a basket of vegetables whispered to her husband, "He's absolutely right. This is why things never change. We're too busy tearing each other down." Nearby, a teenager filming the scene nodded vigorously, clearly moved by Marcus's eloquence. Even those who had initially hesitated to engage were now fully invested, nodding along or whispering encouragement to one another. With the crowd firmly on his side, Marcus turned back to Patricia, his expression softening slightly. "I don't expect you to agree with me today," he said gently, his tone free of malice. "But I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on what's been said here, not just by me, but by everyone. Because if you can open your mind even a little, you might see that the world isn't as black and white as you think it is." His words carried a quiet authority, challenging Patricia without shaming her further. For a brief second, Patricia looked as though she might respond. Her lips parted, and she took a hesitant step forward, as if gathering the courage to speak. But whatever thoughts were swirling in her mind remained unspoken. Instead, she mumbled something inaudible, perhaps an apology, perhaps an excuse, and quickly turned away, clutching her bag tightly as she hurried through the crowd. People parted to let her pass, their expressions ranging from pity to frustration. No one stopped her, but the silence that followed her departure spoke volumes. As Patricia disappeared into the distance, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't loud or raucous, but rather heartfelt and sustained, a testament to the impact of what had just transpired. Strangers patted Marcus on the back, thanking him for his grace and wisdom. One elderly man approached him, tears glistening in his eyes. "Son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you handled that better than anyone could have. You gave us all something to think about." Marcus smiled humbly, shaking hands and accepting the gratitude graciously. But the real victory wasn't in the applause or the praise. It was in the ripple effect of the moment. Conversations continued long after Patricia left, with people sharing their own experiences and insights. A young mother knelt beside her daughter, explaining why it's important to treat everyone with kindness and respect. Two vendors debated the best ways to foster inclusivity in their community. Even those who hadn't spoken during the confrontation walked away visibly moved, their perspectives broadened by what they had witnessed. In that bustling marketplace, amid the vibrant colors of fresh produce and the hum of daily life, something profound had happened. Marcus hadn't just dismantled Patricia's prejudiced remarks. He had inspired a group of strangers to reflect on their own beliefs and biases. And though Patricia may not have changed overnight, the seeds of understanding have been planted in countless hearts that day. As Marcus gathered his, in the days that followed, the incident at the farmer's market became the talk of the town. And soon, far beyond it, someone in the crowd had recorded the entire exchange on their phone, capturing Marcus's calm demeanor and powerful words with striking clarity. The video quickly found its way online, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, sparking conversations about racism, privilege, and the power of peaceful resistance. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet, some praising Marcus's composure, others condemning Patricia's behavior, and many reflecting on their own experiences with discrimination. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing witnesses who were present that day. "It was incredible," said one woman, a vendor at the market. "I've never seen someone handle a situation like that with so much grace and intelligence. He didn't just shut her down, he educated everyone there." Another bystander, a college student, added, "It made me realize how much work we still have to do as a society. But it also gave me hope because people like Marcus are leading by example." Marcus himself was surprised by the sudden attention. He hadn't intended to become an advocate or a public figure. He had simply wanted to stand up for himself while fostering understanding. Yet, as messages of gratitude flooded his inbox, from strangers thanking him for inspiring them to teachers asking if they could share his story in classrooms, he realized the impact went far beyond that marketplace. Humbled by the response, Marcus agreed to speak at community events in schools, sharing his perspective on overcoming prejudice through empathy and education. His talks resonated deeply, particularly with younger audiences eager to learn how to create meaningful change. Meanwhile, Patricia's actions served as a cautionary tale. Though she avoided the spotlight, rumors circulated that she had faced backlash in her neighborhood and workplace once the video went viral. Some speculated that the experience forced her to confront her biases, though no one knew for sure. What was clear, however, was the lesson her behavior underscored. Hate and ignorance only isolate those who cling to them. Her refusal to engage further left a void where growth could have occurred, a stark contrast to Marcus's willingness to rise above hostility. The ripple effects of the encounter extended far beyond the individuals involved. In the weeks that followed, local organizations dedicated to racial equity and inclusion reported a surge in volunteer sign-ups and donations. Community leaders organized workshops and panel discussions aimed at addressing systemic racism and promoting unity. Even small gestures, like neighbors reaching out to one another across cultural divides, reflected the renewed sense of purpose sparked by Marcus's actions. For Marcus, the aftermath reinforced his belief in the power of dialogue. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he told a reporter during one interview, "but every conversation matters. Every moment of understanding brings us closer to a world where everyone feels valued and respected." His optimism was infectious, inspiring countless others to take steps, big or small, toward creating a more inclusive society. As life returned to normal at the farmers' market, the memory of that Saturday afternoon lingered. Vendors and shoppers alike spoke fondly of the man who had turned a hostile confrontation into a transformative moment. Children played between stalls, unaware of the significance of the place, but their parents often paused to remind them. "This is where something important happened. This is where someone showed us all what courage looks like." And so, the story of Marcus Johnson became more than just a viral video or a fleeting headline. It became a symbol of hope. It reminded everyone who heard it that even in the face of hatred, kindness and wisdom can prevail. That standing up for oneself doesn't mean stooping to another's level. It means rising above. And most importantly, it proved that a single voice, speaking with truth and compassion, has the power to inspire change not just in one person, but in an entire community.